Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 tier listing guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we will be covering every single piece of armor in Baldur's Gate 3. Over the last couple weeks, I've gone through and rated every single armor piece in the game. Cloth and robes, light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor, and talked about the strengths and weaknesses of each individual piece, which characters it's good for, and whether you should pick it up at all, or whether it's just Gale food. Doing so in excruciating detail has yielded more than 4 hours of video. And so as with many of my other tier lists, I wanted to go over all of the best pieces of armor in the game so that you have a one-stop shop to come to if you're just looking for the best pieces of gear to give your party the best protection available. We're going to go over all of the pieces of armor that I rated S and A tier in these tier lists, though of course for more detailed information about the armors in the lower tiers, you can go check out the individual videos for each type of armor. And I'll be talking about what makes it good, why you would want to pick it up, and which characters are going to use it. I'll also be mentioning any notable armors from lower tiers that you should keep an eye out for if you're doing a specific build. We'll talk about which ones in the lower tiers are particularly useful for certain characters, and I will be making corrections based on the community feedback to those tier lists, because I'm always very open to changing my opinion if people have good enough reasons to make me want to do so, so I'll be moving some of these armors around based on convincing arguments that were made in the comments. I will be rating these armors based on the same criteria for all 4 of the armor types. In S tier, we have armors that are best in slot for a wide array of characters, or best in slot for particularly powerful characters. In A tier, armors that are interesting alternatives to the S tier armors, or best in slot for certain narrower characters. In B tier, armors that will usually not see a ton of play in parties, but can be swapped in for certain encounters or have interesting utility options. In C tier, armor pieces that are very narrow in scope, and so maybe they have some use for a specific kind of themed or unoptimized build, but typically won't see play. And in D tier, armors that are very rarely going to be useful to you, and that you can pretty safely sell to merchants or have Gale eat. I also am rating these armors based on their power when you get them. So we are looking at the armors and how good they are based on when you have access to them in the game, because it doesn't really make sense to rate an Act 1 armor against an Act 3 armor, because the Act 1 armor doesn't have to be as good in order to be powerful. That means that on average, as we go from left to right across these tiers, the armors will get stronger because they show up later on in the game, though I will mention some of the Act 1 armors that stay best in slot all game. And when you're evaluating these armor pieces, we are going to be looking at how strong they are when you actually have access to them. Finally, before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Martin Guy for the $10 donation, Elnric for the extremely generous $100 donation, thank you so much, Douglas Fugate for the $10, and Michael Nadler for the $5, as well as Elnric also for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. It really does mean a lot, and I really do appreciate the support. Thank you. Alright, let's get into it and start rating armor. We're going to start with cloth and robes. These are armors that require no armor proficiency, so they're available to any character, which means that while they're not necessarily the most widely used pieces of armor, they are the most widely available. Since any character can use them, every character has to consider whether one of these pieces of armor is the best for that slot on this character, so they will always be something that you have to think about when you're playing through the game, thanks to their ubiquity and the power level of these armor pieces. In addition to their wide availability, these armors allow you to use mage armor, because they don't count as wearing armor, so you can cast mage armor while wearing one of these sets, as well as potentially the bracers of defense, so with proper itemization and preparation, you can have 15 base armor class, plus your dexterity, plus any additional bonuses that the armors might have, which means that as long as your party is set up to make use of them properly, even the unarmored armor sets can be extremely competitive with the armor values of heavier pieces of armor. So often you'll be evaluating these based solely on the enchantment, not on the actual armor class, because you can increase their armor class in ways that are pretty easy to access throughout the game, which means that even characters with proficiencies in heavier armor will often end up using one of these armor sets if it's the best one available to them. We're starting off incredibly strong with the Graceful Cloth, an item that is super powerful when you get it near the end of Act 1 for just about any character that can equip it, which is every character, and remains best in slot for some characters throughout the entire game. The Graceful Cloth gives you +2 to your dexterity, up to a maximum of 20, and it's no secret that dexterity is the best attribute in Dungeons & Dragons, and particularly in Baldur's Gate, where initiative rolls are done with a d4 instead of a d20, so bonuses to your dexterity and thus your initiative are correspondingly wildly more valuable than they would be in tabletop. So even small boosts to your initiative are incredibly strong, and of course you'll be seeing that reflected in the ratings of these items as we go through them. The Graceful Cloth also gives you advantage on your dex skill checks, so sleight of hand and stealth, which means that for a stealth archer in particular, it's an incredibly powerful item. Plus to your dexterity for a stealth archer obviously gives you bonuses to hit and damage, gives you advantage on stealth checks, so you'll pass your stealth more often, and advantage on sleight of hand checks, which is very likely to be the character that's doing that. The bonus jump distance that this item gives you is incredibly powerful for them as well, and it lets you hit 20 dexterity in combination with Ethel's hair without spending a feat on a dexterity boost. So the Graceful Cloth's dexterity bonus basically saves you a feat for a very feat-starved archetype. So any character can use this because plus dexterity is just so powerful, increasing your armor class, initiative, and so on. But for a stealth archer in particular, this will remain the best in slot item throughout the entire game, potentially. The second S-tier item from Act 1 is the Protectee Sparks Wall, which should probably be called the Attacky Sparks Wall, because it gives you +1 to your save DCs, which means you're just landing your spells much more often and much more reliably. It also has a bunch of defensive bonuses tied to having lightning charges, but those bonuses you don't need to make use of. You can if you're doing a lightning charge build, but the main thing is that you just gain +1 to your save DCs passively. So for any spellcaster, this is going to be the best in slot item for Act 1 and probably Act 2 as well, because it just makes you better at landing your spells. Boosts to your save DC are just incredibly powerful, and so the Protectee Sparks Wall just remains excellent throughout the entire game, up until you get a replacement in Act 3 in the form of the Robe of the Weave. In Act 2 in S tier, we have the Potent Robe, which gives you additional damage equal to your Charisma modifier to your cantrips, and that damage applies to every damage instance that your cantrips do. So for a Warlock who's firing Eldritch Blasts, which do multiple beams, it's going to apply your Charisma to damage over and over again with a single spell cast. That vastly increases the damage that Warlocks do, but is also pretty powerful for any charisma-based spellcaster who wants to be using cantrips. So a sorcerer or a bard can benefit from the Potent Robe very strongly as well, just to increase their cantrip damage, make them more reliable, and also gain the additional temporary hit points and armor class that this item gives you. Obviously, this item is primarily intended for Warlocks, and for just about every Warlock, the Potent Robe will be best in slot throughout the entire game, boosting your Eldritch Blast damage massively, but this also has pretty good utility for other charisma-based spellcasters. The Bone Spike Garb is available in Act 3 and gives you damage reduction and temporary hit points when raging, which are extremely powerful for unarmored barbarians, but also the flat damage reduction on the Bone Spike Garb is just good for pretty much any character that wants to survive, and in particular characters that are reducing incoming damage, which can be barbarians using Bearheart Barbarian, but can also be Abjuration Wizards using Arcane Ward. The 2 damage reduction that you get on the Bone Spike Garb for an Abjuration Wizard is basically 2 more Arcane Ward stacks, and the retaliation damage that the Bone Spike Garb provides is incredibly powerful as well. The Robe of the Weave is the gold standard armor set for mages in Act 3, so it's going to be your endgame armor for just about every wizard and sorcerer who want to remain unarmored. The +1 to save DC is incredibly powerful, of course, as we saw with the Protectee Sparks Wall, and the Robe of the Weave combines that with a +2 to your armor class, so you can combine that with mage armor, with a shield, with additional bonuses to your armor class from items, to end up with armor class that's competitive with even much more heavily armored characters in the late game. So the Robe of the Weave also has a healing passive, where if you succeed on a saving throw against a spell, you gain 1d6 HP back. That's mostly irrelevant, but the passive benefits of the Robe of the Weave are incredible, allowing you to hit high armor class without sacrificing your offensive capabilities, which is exactly what you want for a wizard or sorcerer. High AC helps them not get targeted, and landing your spells is of course very good. The Vest of Soul Rejuvenation is the best in slot item for a monk in the late game, giving you also +2 to armor class, which combined with your dexterity bonus and your wisdom bonus to AC and other items that can allow you to gain bonuses to AC as well, can allow monks to reach moderately high armor class. They still won't have ACs that are competitive with dedicated characters that are reaching super high ACs, but monks can reach at least respectable ACs using this item for a melee character, and also gives you the greater Kushigo counter ability, where when an enemy misses you, you get to punch them with a reaction. That in and of itself is pretty good when combined with the high armor class that this item lets you reach, but there's also a trick with this item where if you walk away from an enemy and they attack you with an attack of opportunity, like if you deliberately provoke an attack of opportunity from an enemy and they miss with it, you get to hit them, but when it happens on your turn, the item is bugged and it will actually trigger extra attack. So you can get a whole extra 2 attacks by deliberately triggering attacks of opportunity against enemies, provided that they miss. Even without abusing that bug, though, the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation is still just a very, very powerful item because of the bonus armor class and the additional attack per turn that it gives a class that normally doesn't have great uses for their reactions. So to sum up in S tier, the Graceful Cloth is great for literally any character for large chunks of the game, and for a stealth archer is quite possibly what they'll be wearing all game. The Protectee Sparks Wall is best in slot for an offensively focused wizard or sorcerer for Acts 1 and 2. The Potent Robe is the best for warlocks, and can also have some nifty utility for other charisma casters, but for warlocks is going to stay best in slot all game. The Bone Spike Garb is best for unarmored barbarians or abjuration wizards who can use the damage reduction pretty effectively, and it's just good for barbarians in general. It's also just a great default if you don't know what to put on a character. The Bone Spike Garb is always great. Robe of the Weave takes over from the Protectee Sparks Wall for wizards and sorcerers, and the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation is best in slot for monks. In A tier, there are some quite powerful options available as well, which either offer interesting alternatives to the S tier items, or have specific utility for certain builds. The Infernal Robe is gated behind a story event, but is available quite early in the game, and gives you resistance to fire damage, as well as +1 armor class, and lets you cast Fire Shield Warm once per long rest, so the fire version of Fire Shield. That means it basically gives you cold and fire resistance, and resistances this early in the game are sort of hard to come by, so it's a pretty powerful defensive tool, and those are 2 quite relevant damage resistances. As well, you're just getting access to a 4th level spell several levels early, with this item, so for a character that can use it, like a barbarian especially, this is very good for. The Infernal Robe is just very powerful. Fire Shield, early in the game, is going to do enough damage to actually meaningfully improve your damage output, so the Infernal Robe is just very good when you get it early. The Enraging Heart Garb gives you +2 to your Constitution, which is a pretty good way to maintain concentration on spells and boost the hit points of a spellcaster. It also is supposed to give you 2 turns of Wrath when you enter Rage to boost your damage output, but unfortunately the Enraging Heart Garb is bugged and doesn't give you those 2 turns of Wrath. Even without them, though, it's just a pretty good defensive option for spellcasters, available relatively early, and increasing your Constitution by 2 is just a very powerful effect that is always worth looking at, because it just boosts your hit points, which for a squishy spellcaster can be very relevant, and makes you better at passing Constitution saves, including concentration checks for spells. Also available in Act 2, the Icebite robe is one that I'm actually going to move based on a correction that I need to make to my previous tier list. The Icebite robe gives you cold damage resistance and allows you to cast Armour of Agathis once per long rest, which is a fairly reasonable combination by itself, but I put it in A tier because you used to be able to cast Armour of Agathis and then equip a different robe, which is just a very powerful effect for any character to have access to, but that's actually been patched out. Now if you unequip the Icebite robe, the Armour of Agathis will disappear, which makes it much less widely useful. Cold resistance is still a relevant damage type, but the only character that's going to want this now is probably going to be a barbarian. But for an unarmored barbarian, this is still a pretty reasonable option, the Icebite robe. Armour of Agathis is very good for a barbarian. You don't have to maintain concentration on it, and it gives you additional hit points, which are then multiplied by the damage reduction from rage and so on. And of course the retaliation damage helps increase your DPS. So I'm going to move the Icebite robe down from A tier to B tier, because I was just remembering the mechanic from a previous patch when I rated this in my initial tier list. The Moon Devotion robe, also available in Act 2, has a ton of effects, but the most relevant one is that it gives you advantage on Constitution saves and +1 to your saving throws, which is pretty powerful because for any spellcaster, because it's just going to let you maintain concentration on spells. So if you are playing like a support spellcaster who doesn't need increased save DC and just wants to maintain concentration on your spells, the Moon Devotion robe is pretty good. It also lets you cast Mage Armor once per long rest and gives you a little bit of retaliation damage when you pass saving throws while you have Mage Armor on. Lets you cast Produce Flame at will, although it's not that by this point in the game isn't particularly strong, but advantage on Constitution saving throws and an increase of +1 to all your saving throws is just pretty good for any support spellcaster. If you're like a Twin Haste sorcerer or a cleric who's mostly casting Bless in combat, then the Moon Devotion robe can be pretty reasonable. You often will have better options, but this is a very powerful effect, so it's always worth looking at. Finally, in Act 3, the Garb of the Land and Sky is an interesting alternative option for monks. It gives you Blade Ward, so damage resistance to physical damage, whenever you're using Patient Defense, which is something you mostly don't want to be doing, but is a cool option if you have a build based around that. Gives you 1 armor class, which is less than the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation, but still relevant, and gives you additional damage on your next attack, 1d8 additional force damage, and advantage whenever you use Step of the Wind. The problem with using Step of the Wind for this additional damage is that every time you use Step of the Wind, it costs you a bonus action. So while additional damage is really good for monks, this actually decreases your damage output, because every bonus action you're spending on Step of the Wind is one that you're not spending on Flurry of Blows. This item also has some bugs that let you use the bonus damage more than once. I go into those in more detail in the original tier list. But even including those bugs, Step of the Wind is going to decrease your damage output when you're using the Garb of the Land and Sky compared to just making attacks. So this gives you a bunch of bonuses for things that you mostly don't want to be doing, i.e. using Patient Defense, or that you only want to be doing when you have to, i.e. using Step of the Wind. But if you find that you're using Step of the Wind frequently in combats, then the Garb of the Land and Sky gives you a benefit for doing that, which is pretty powerful. And so, for a character that's using Step of the Wind a lot, just to move around the battlefield frequently, the Garb of the Land and Sky is an interesting alternative to the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation. Usually not as powerful, but definitely worth mentioning. Other notable items in the robes and clothing section include the Mighty Cloth, which gives you +2 to your strength, which obviously is not as powerful as +2 to dexterity or even +2 to constitution from the Enraging Heart Garb, but would be much better if the elixirs didn't exist. Typically in Baldur's Gate, if you want an increase to your strength, you can just use a strength elixir. But the Mighty Cloth makes a pretty interesting option for characters playing without using strength elixirs. Either you have another elixir you prefer, or you think that they're cheap and don't want to use one every day, then the Mighty Cloth can increase your strength and is a pretty powerful option for no elixir runs. And the Robe of Supreme Defenses, which, when you're concentrating on a spell, increases your saving throws up to your spell casting modifier, which can be a bonus of like +5 to +7 to your saving throws in the late game. So if you really, really have to pass saves, the Robe of Supreme Defenses means that you are almost guaranteed to pass every saving throw in the game. You can use this for saves that you know are going to happen, like in dialogue checks. You can boost your saving throws massively with the Robe of Supreme Defenses just by concentrating on a spell. And you can also use this for fights that have lots of saving throws in them, because it just means that you'll pass all your saving throws. It also means you never fail concentration on spells, because +7 to your saves, +5 to your saves is going to mean that you pretty much never are going to fail concentration checks. So while typically you're going to want offensive options rather than defensive options on spellcasters, the Robe of Supreme Defenses is a great defensive option and definitely worth considering. Overall, cloth armors are extremely widely applicable and include armors that are best in slot for a wide array of characters, and so are very much worth including in your lineup. Often you'll want to do these with mage armor or other sources of increases to your armor class, but the effects of them are so powerful that many characters are going to end up using cloth armors, even ones with heavier armor proficiencies. Next up, light armors. Light armor, I'm not gonna lie, is in a weird spot in Baldur's Gate 3 and typically is quite weak. For one thing, look how few light armors there are compared to how many robes and clothing sets there are. It's by far the least numerous set of armor in the game, and many of them are just enchanted versions of otherwise unremarkable armor sets. Light armor also has the problem that a lot of the armor class available for light armor is going to be superseded by using a set of clothing and casting mage armor, or by one of the medium armors that allows you to use your full dexterity bonus to your armor class. So there's relatively few characters that don't prefer one of the powerful clothing sets and having higher AC as a result, or one of the medium armor sets and having higher AC as a result, and actually want to use light armor. Nevertheless, there's still some pretty powerful light armors available that can boost your characters significantly, and especially in the early game, you won't always have like the spell slots or scrolls to use mage armor all the time, so some characters will be using this and then might switch to the graceful cloth or an equivalent clothing set once you get a lot of scrolls of mage armor and that kind of thing. And then also in the later game, you get access to some of the truly incredible light armor sets that are absolutely build defining. There's only one S-tier light armor available in Act 1 though, and that is the Spider Silk armor, which gives you 12 base armor class, so notably one less than a character wearing no armor but with mage armor cast on them, but gives you a +1 bonus to stealth checks and advantage on constitution saves. This is the earliest access that you're going to get to advantage on con saves, which is a very powerful ability for spellcasters. So the Spider Silk armor is actually not really for rogues, but is instead for light armored spellcasters, like bards or warlocks, or characters that have light armor proficiency inherently, which many do, because many of the races in Baldur's Gate 3 just get light armor proficiency no matter what class they are, including, of course, Gale, so he will always have access to the Spider Silk armor, even if he's still a wizard. That means that you can use this armor very early on in the game, because you can get access to it pretty early to maintain concentration on spells. So while it's not the highest armor class available, it is just going to let you maintain concentration, which is super valuable in the early game, and is a great option for any light armor spellcaster. The +2 studded leather comes much, much later, either near the end of Act 2 or early in Act 3, depending on how much XP you've gotten. It's available for merchants when your party is level 9, and it gives you 14 base AC and +1 to your initiative rolls. The reason this is in S tier is that initiative rolls are super powerful, and this gives you more armor class by default than the graceful cloth, especially if you want to use one of the gloves or helmets that count as armor and will prevent you from benefiting from mage armor. So the +2 studded leather is really good for just any character that wants to have reasonable armor class in light armor and a bonus to their initiative. There are relatively few characters that are going to fit this description because they'll either be able to use the Graceful Cloth plus Mage Armor or one of the medium armors with uncapped dexterity and a bonus to initiative, like the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail. But for characters without medium armor proficiency, the +2 studded leather is definitely going to be an upgrade when you get it, so it's going in S tier. In Act 3, the Armor of Moon Basking is a light armor that's intended for Moon Druids, and is just best in slot for Moon Druids. It gives you 22 temporary hit points, and 1 damage reduction while you still have those hit points whenever you enter Wild Shape, and it also gives you a +2 to your armor class and advantage on saving throws against spells while you're Wild Shaped. That makes your Wild Shapes incredibly more resilient, and it's also just one of the few items in the game that works while Wild Shaped. So any character that's intending to Wild Shape frequently is going to want the Armor of Moon Basking. It makes you wildly more tanky, no pun intended, and will also just be an item that you can use that nobody else can use, while you also can't use any other good items, because Wild Shapes mostly don't benefit from items, but the Armor of Moon Basking, nobody else wants it, because you only want it if you're Wild Shaping, and you don't want anyone else's items, because you only want items that work in Wild Shape. So the Armor of Moon Basking is absolutely God's sent at the point in the game where you get it, and will boost your Wild Shape characters massively. The Armor of the Spore Keeper is intended for Spore Druids, and gives you a +1 bonus to your spell save DC, and an additional necrotic damage every time you deal necrotic damage, which can go kind of nuts on Tactician mode or below, where this counts as a damage source, and so can proc additional damage riders, and can snowball the amount of damage that it's doing out of control, thanks to some bugs with how damage is calculated. This can do way, way more damage by causing other sources of additional damage to trigger multiple times. But even without that, if you're just doing a little bit of necrotic damage, the +1 is relevant. And since you're a Spore Druid, you're going to be doing a decent amount of necrotic damage. +1 to your spell saves is awesome. And it lets you cast a bunch of fungus abilities, including haste spores. Once per long rest, you can haste your entire party, which is obviously just very valuable. There are alternative options for the Spore Druid that are also good. It's not like the Moon Druid that is just 100% of the time going to want the Armor of Moon Basking, but the Armor of the Spore Keeper, the AoE haste and +1 spell save DC and being decent AC and everything, all combine to make a package that Spore Druids really, really want, and so it's very good for them. The Ballast Armor is available only through certain story events, but gives you one of the most game-breaking effects in the entire game, passive inflicting of vulnerability to a damage type on an enemy. Enemies within 7 feet of you when you're wearing the Ballast Armor become vulnerable to piercing damage, and vulnerability is something that Dungeons & Dragons is typically very stingy with allowing you to use, because it just completely breaks the damage curve and ruins encounters. An encounter that's intended to take 4 turns only takes 2 turns when an enemy is taking double damage, so it just totally breaks the intended damage curves and means that you are very unlikely to see a lot of enemies actually use their powerful abilities, because you're just killing them before they can ever act. I don't particularly need to spend a ton of time on how good this is, but for any character that's doing piercing damage or who its allies are doing piercing damage, and it's a very rare party where you aren't doing some piercing damage, the Ballast Armor is incredible. For a party built around it, it's obviously even better. And something else to note is that it doesn't have to be the character that's doing the piercing damage that's actually wearing the Ballast Armor. You can use this on a melee ally of an archer to cause the archer's shots to do double damage while their ally is next to an enemy. You can also use it on an archer yourself, because the aura is slightly larger than melee range, so the archer can just get up close and obliterate enemies. In addition to that, it gives you the best AC available in light armor with 14 base AC and +2 to initiative rolls, which is of course a broken effect. Altogether, the Ballast Armor is just an absolutely game-breaking piece of armor. I decided not to make an S+ tier for the armor sets, but it obviously would go in S+ tier if there was one, because it just ruins the intended balance of the damage curves of Dungeons and Dragons by making enemies take double damage. So best in slot for any party that's using piercing damage, even small amounts of piercing damage, even better if you're using lots of it. Finally, the elegant studded leather is just good. It's just a very solid package. Gives you 14 AC, which is great for light armor, +2 to initiative, which again lets you go first. Going first wins combats. Advantage on stealth checks, very nice for any character that's rolling stealth checks, and lets you cast shield once per short rest, which for a character that's using the elegant studded leather is probably enough to keep them alive in most circumstances, because typically you're going to be a ranged character or a character that's stealthing a lot, so you won't get attacked frequently, and then when you do, you can block it with the shield. This is just a great package of abilities, and almost any character can benefit from using the elegant studded leather. This is one of the reasons to use light armor, is that this is just a very solid armor piece that almost anyone can use. So to sum up S tier, the spider silk armor is best in slot for light armor capable spellcasters in the early game who might get hit and drop concentration. The +2 studded leather is a nice upgrade over the graceful cloth for some characters, or over earlier game light armors, because it gives you a bonus to initiative. The armor of moon basking is best in slot for a moon druid. The armor of the spore keeper is best in slot for some spore druid builds. You can also use the haste ability and then swap it out for a different armor set as well, so it's just very powerful. The ballast armor is absolutely game-breaking for just about any party that's using piercing damage, and the elegant studded leather is just a really good armor set that almost any character can benefit very strongly from using. In A tier, I have placed the studded leather, which is just 12 AC, and so is going to, because it drops from some early game enemies, is going to be your first upgrade from 11 AC starting leather armor to 12 AC studded leather, though of course you're going to try to get out of it as soon as possible. The drow studded leather, which is a 12 AC armor that gives you +1 to your stealth checks, although something that's kind of interesting about this is that it actually increases your stealth proficiency by 1, rather than giving you a +1 bonus to stealth checks. So characters with expertise, doubling their proficiency, get +2 to stealth checks when wearing the drow studded leather. But mostly this is just a relatively early game way to get 12 AC again. And the armor of landfall, which is the land druid special armor from Act 3, which gives you 13 base AC, +1 to your save DCs, and advantage on constitution saves, as well as some passive healing when you start in a plant growth or vines spell, and the ability to cast plant growth once per short rest. Casting plant growth once per short rest is pretty nice. The passive healing is a reasonable benefit, but mostly this is a 13 AC armor with +1 to your spell save DC and advantage on con saves. It compares unfavorably in general to the Robe of the Weave, because it's lower armor class when you have the Robe of the Weave with mage armor on. So you're basically trading 2 AC for advantage on con saves. That, in general, I think is not a great trade, because getting hit more often means you're going to be making those concentration checks more often. But if another character needs the Robe of the Weave, or if you have 2 characters that just want the same sort of plus DC caster item in the late game, or if you aren't using mage armor for whatever reason, or if you just really heavily value the advantage on constitution saves and the additional options that this armor gives you with plant growth, which is a very powerful spell, don't get me wrong. The ability to cast it once per short rest is very nice. Then the armor of landfall is an interesting option compared to the Robe of the Weave. Typically, your land druid is going to be better off in the Robe of the Weave or in a medium armor if you want a defensive choice, but the armor of landfall is a powerful enough piece that it's, again, worth looking at for caster builds that have light armor access. Finally, one piece of armor from lower tiers that is worth mentioning is the Shade Clinger armor, which gives you advantage on saving throws while you're obscured. This is worth mentioning both for the actual effect, which can help you gain advantage on saves, when you're going into a conversation that you know you're going to have to make a saving throw in. If you can stay in darkness, you get advantage on saves during that conversation. But also because this armor has a totally game-breaking bug associated with it, where if you take off the armor, the effect doesn't go away. So your whole party can just get free advantage on saving throws permanently. If you put this on in shadows and then take it off, you can pass it around your whole party, give them permanent advantage on saves. Obviously, that's a bug and super overpowered, but if you're willing to abuse it, then the Shadeclinger armor can give you a massive benefit to your entire party. Even without that bug, though, it does have some interesting uses for just giving you advantage on saves for specific times when you really need it. Overall, light armor is, like I said at the beginning, in a weird spot in Baldur's Gate. There are some really good sets of light armor, the druid armors, the ballast armor, the elegant studded leather, but for Acts 1 and 2, most characters are going to be better off in clothing with mage armor cast on them, or in medium armor instead. And so a lot of times a light armor character is going to try to get medium armor proficiency by taking a subclass or a level of a class or a race that gives you medium armor, in order to not have to use the relatively weak light armor sets available in the game. I do hope that they fix this in some way, or that modders can add more interesting light armor options in future, but for now, you're mostly going to end up using light armors in Act 3, and in Acts 1 and 2, you're going to be looking at other categories of armor for your armor needs. Medium armors. So medium armors are overall the best armors in Baldur's Gate 3. It is the largest category, and also the one with the highest average quality, so the highest number of great armors exist in the medium armor category, both because there's more of them and because on average they're better. Even in the armors that show up in the lower tiers often have something interesting about them, and it has the most S-tier armors, gives you the best access to solid armor throughout the game. Characters that would normally often want to use light armor, like rogues, will often go out of their way to get medium armor access in Baldur's Gate because the medium armor is so good, and characters that would normally wear heavy armor will often end up in medium armor for large chunks of the game because there are long periods of the game where the best available armor, even for a heavy armor user, is medium armor. So this is the largest, best, and most important category of armor, and most characters, when you're creating them, you should think, is there a way I can get medium armor proficiency on this character? Because it will, on average, make that character stronger if you have medium armor proficiency. The luminous armor, also available quite early in Act 1, and also providing 15 base AC, might be the single best piece of armor in the game, judging by its increase to your chance of winning the game, because it's available so early and is so incredibly powerful, and actually I think might be the third best item in the game, period, in terms of its increase to your expected win rate after the Elixir of Hill Giant Strength and the Gloves of Dexterity. If it's not third, it's definitely in the top 5 or very least top 10 best items in the entire game. The Luminous Armor gives you, whenever you do radiant damage, you apply Radiating Orb in an AoE, and Radiating Orb stacks up to 10 times and reduces enemy attack rolls by 1 per stack. So the Luminous Armor, even if you're only doing a little bit of radiant damage, which is very easy to do on a cleric or paladin or just any character that has like the Callous Glow Ring or a weapon that does radiant damage, is effectively the same as a piece of medium armor that gives you like base 19 AC, because just 2 stacks of radiating orbs reducing enemy attacks by 4 make this the highest AC armor set available in the game, pretty much, and of course the penalties apply to your allies. But then also, if you build around this effect and can stack radiating orbs up on enemies, it completely shuts down encounters. Enemies who have minus 10 penalties to attack obviously are harmless. It's very, very rare that they're actually going to be able to land an attack. And so the luminous armor is very good for characters that aren't intending to abuse its effects, but if you are intending to abuse its effects, it will pretty much single-handedly win the game for you, at least when combined with sources of radiant damage and other stacks of radiating orb, and makes the game effectively trivial in almost every encounter, because most encounters in the game rely on landing attack rolls. This shuts that strategy down entirely. So the luminous armor just absolutely game-breakingly powerful. The adamantine scale mail gives you 16 base AC, also reduces enemy attack rolls, though not as easily as the luminous armor, and attackers can't critically hit you. Removing critical hits from the equation just removes one of the major sources of losses in the game, because how you lose the game frequently is when stuff starts to snowball out of control. When you get critically hit, then your characters have to spend turns healing that other character, you get critically hit again, and it turns into an action economy snowball against you, where your characters are spending turns trying to recover or just being unconscious and not able to act. Without critical hits, incoming damage is much more predictable, and so you're just much less likely to get caught by surprise or caught in a run of bad luck. The adamantine scale mail removes that and is therefore awesome for any medium armor tank. Starting in Act 2, the Yuan-Ti scale mail gives you 15 AC, but +1 to initiative, and we've talked extensively about how good initiative bonuses are, and also lets you use your entire dexterity bonus for your armor class. So this is the first source of this effect, which effectively obsoletes light armor entirely. It just gives you light armor, but with way better armor class, because it's 15 base AC. The light armors at this point have 13 base AC, so you're increasing your armor class dramatically, still getting +1 to your initiative, and also it gives you and just getting way better at defending your character. So any character that has high dexterity and medium armor proficiency wants the Yuan-Ti scale mail, and then the similar armors with uncapped dexterity later on in the game. The rare version, or very rare version, of the Dark Justiciar half-plate, this is the one that's rewarded as a quest reward, gives you 17 base AC, so it's going to be the highest AC available in Act 2, advantage on con saves, and advantage on stealth checks, while obscured, but you're rarely making stealth checks while you're not obscured, so it's just permanent advantage on stealth checks. And then a bunch of stuff about Shield of Faith, which you can mostly ignore, although it's nice for just having a bonus AC when you're going into a fight and don't have anything else to concentrate on. And reducing incoming damage from Shield of Faith is reasonable, but mostly this is just a 17 AC medium armor with advantage on Constitution saves. This is a very high AC setup, so for any caster character with medium armor proficiency, this is going to make you very, very good at not getting hit, and very good at maintaining concentration on spells if you do. In Act 3, you get the Elven Chain, which is medium armor, but when you wear it, you gain proficiency, which means that any character, no matter their armor proficiency, can use the Elven Chain. It's 14 base AC, but does still cap your dexterity bonus, so it's going to be 16 AC for most characters. But it can be worn by spellcasters or characters with only light armor proficiency, and still benefit from high armor class, or moderately high armor class as a result. You also get +2 bonus to your initiative rolls, and this is one of the earliest opportunities to get a +2 bonus to your initiative, so for a character that needs an initiative bonus, the Elven Chain is incredible, and advantage on dex saves, which is less important, but mostly this is a way to just get an early +2 bonus to your initiative while not sacrificing armor class on like a spellcaster or something, especially a character that's heavily multi-classed and couldn't afford to take alert. The Elven Chain is going to be excellent because +2 to your initiative is just an awesome ability that any character can make use of. The Armor of Agility gives you 17 base AC and lets you add your full dexterity modifier to your armor class. This piece of armor is the source of the highest AC setups in the game. It just gives you the opportunity to reach the highest levels of armor class in the game. So for dexterity-based characters that don't want to get hit, the Armor of Agility is the gold standard, just the best possible item for those characters. It also gives you a +2 bonus to your saving throws, and for dexterity-based characters with super high armor class, they're effectively immune to physical damage or attacks, because they just won't get hit. So a +2 bonus to saving throws is really synergistic, because the only thing you're worried about on that kind of character is failing a save. The Armor of Agility makes you almost immune to physical damage because you can't get hit by attacks, and gives you a significant bonus against spells with the +2 saving throws. So it's just one of the best possible options for a defensive setup that will carry you through to the end of the game. The Flame Enameled Armor is 16 base AC, and +2 to saving throws. So while it won't be as high an AC setup as the Armor of Agility, it still gives you a pretty significant bonus to your ability to resist spells and saves. Also lets you cast Fire Shield, so you get effectively resistance to fire and cold damage from the Flame Enameled Armor, which gives you passive resistance to fire and active resistance to cold, and +2 to your initiative. Again, incredibly powerful ability, going to be an upgrade over the Elven Chain for medium armor capable characters, and excellent for any character that is going to be facing fire or cold damage, because it just gives you resistance to those effects. Solid AC, excellent initiative, just a great default piece of equipment, similar to the elegant studded leather from light armors. The Flame Enameled Armor is just a good thing to use on any character. It doesn't need to have specific synergy because it's just got a lot of great stats that any character wants. So, to sum up the S tier armors for medium armor, the Githyanki half-plate and the +1 breastplate are just your best AC setups for Act 1, or for the first half of Act 1 or so. 15 base AC, +2 from your dexterity. It's going to be higher armor class than anything else that you'll have available, so those are just great. The Luminous armor is game-breakingly powerful and best in slot for clerics, as well as any character that's intending to abuse Radiating Orb, or doing a decent amount of radiant damage. The Adamantine Scale Mail is the best for medium armor tanks, and will stay relevant throughout the entire game because of the peace of mind it gives you by avoiding critical hits. The Yuan-Ti Scale is your first source of uncapped dexterity medium armor, which means it's the highest AC setup for dexterity characters. When you get it, gives you +1 to initiative and obsoletes all of the light armor that your characters may have been wearing up to that point. Dark Justiciar Halfplate is really good for spellcasters, just great defensive option for any medium armor capable spellcaster. Elven Chain is your first source of +2 initiative, which at the time that you get it is of course going to give you the ability to win initiative in many fights, and works for any character, so works to give plus initiative to characters that normally don't have access to that, or characters that want to use this while still having a high armor class setup. Armor of Agility is the highest AC setup in the game and the best defensive armor in the entire game when it comes to keeping you alive by not getting hit. And the Flame Enameled Armor is just a very good package of stats that almost any character can use. So best in slot for a character that doesn't have specific synergy with one of these other armors. A medium armor character that isn't dexterity based probably wants the Flame Enameled Armor. In A tier for the medium armors, the basic Scale Mail is your first AC upgrade for most characters in the game. Most medium armor characters start with Hide Armor or the Chain Shirt, and so upgrading to 14 AC is a pretty big boost for them, and Scale Mail is available on the Nautiloid or on the beach directly thereafter, so it's just going to be your first upgrade before you can get access to all the 15 AC medium armors. Both medium and heavy armor characters will be wearing this. Halfplate +1 is your first upgrade over the 15 AC medium armors. It's available from merchants, and so you're going to be able to boost your armor class for characters that don't have... for characters with 14 or dexterity, you're going to be able to boost your armor class by picking up the half-plate +1. The +2 hide is probably the first source of an initiative bonus that most parties are able to access. It's available from merchants starting at level 5 and gives you decent armor class with 14 AC and a +1 to your initiative, so it's very much worth looking out for because it's going to boost your initiative. I also saw in the comments on my medium armor tier list that many people were saying they've seen this before level 5. It's not supposed to show up at merchants before level 5, but if it's bugged and is showing up as early as level 3, as many people said, then it's definitely S tier, because at level 3, a 14 AC medium armor that gives you a +1 to your initiative is a huge boost to your party's power level, and so if it is showing up earlier, I would move it to S tier. Even at level 5, though, though it's still an A tier armor, because initiative bonuses are just that good. The +2 scale mail, similarly a 16 AC armor that gives you a +1 bonus to your initiative, so it's going to let you maintain that initiative bonus while increasing your armor class, and it's just very solid for medium armor characters that want to go fast, and I'm going to say it over and over again, initiative bonuses are absolutely critical in Baldur's Gate 3, so even a +1 available on a generic armor like this is really, really solid. And the normal version, the blue version of the Dark Justiciar half-plate that you just get, regardless of your story choices, is a solid armor for defensively minded medium armor casters, so a support cleric or something like this, because it gives you 16 AC and advantage on Constitution saves, obviously significantly worse than its rare counterpart, but still a solid armor that you can make use of, because advantage on con saves is just very good for casters, and 16 AC is not at all embarrassing, so for a more defensively minded caster, the Dark Justiciar half-plate can be excellent. Many of the lower tier items have some interesting options, but because none of them stand out as like wildly better than the others in terms of those interesting options, if you're interested in the cool things that you can do with the lower tier armors, definitely check out my more detailed medium armor tier list. But overall, medium armors are just incredibly powerful. There are so many good ones, and they're available to so many different characters. There's a medium armor for just about every character archetype that's going to be best in slot. They include some of the most broken items in the game, just like the most powerful items in the game. They include the highest armor class setup in the game, one of the best endgame items in the game, available right from the beginning, and so on. So medium armors are absolutely worth picking up on just about any character. Githyanki is an excellent race option just because of the medium armor access for characters that don't normally get it, and many characters are going to want to look to multiclass to give them medium armor access because these items are just so strong that they increase the power of your build dramatically. And finally, heavy armor. Heavy armor, similar to light armor, is in an odd position in Baldur's Gate 3, both because of the specific availability of heavy armor and also just because of the base mechanics of the game. In Dungeons & Dragons, heavy armor is designed to allow you to get decent armor class without having to invest strongly in dexterity, which in tabletop 5th edition is fine, but in Baldur's Gate 3 is a lot more punishing because of the D4 initiative system. A character with only 10 dexterity in tabletop is still going to go first in a reasonable percentage of combats, or at least not go last in a reasonable percentage of combats. But a character with 10 dexterity in Baldur's Gate is going to go last like 60-70% of the time, which is just ruinous to your ability to act as a party and also to win fights. So the D4 initiative system really hurts heavy armor users, because if you've already invested in dexterity in order to have high initiative, then you might as well just use medium armor instead of heavy armor if it's got a better effect, which in Baldur's Gate it often does. This is exacerbated because, as you can see here, there's only one heavy armor from Act 1 that I consider to be very high quality, so a lot of the time heavy armor users are going to spend the majority of Act 1 in medium armor and not switch until late Act 1, early Act 2 into heavy armor. So many parties are going to have 2 or 3 characters wearing medium armor for all of Act 1, and only in Act 2 will they diversify, and then only in Act 3 will all 4 sets of armor become represented when the light armors catch up in quality to the medium, heavy, and clothing sets. Nevertheless, heavy armors do have a lot of powerful options and great items available, including the single best piece of defensive equipment in the entire game, so heavy armors are very much worth using anyways, but I did want to talk a little bit about their sort of odd position that they occupy, especially in Act 1. The awesome Act 1 heavy armor is, of course, the Adamantine Splint, which gives you 18 base AC, so it's going to be an AC upgrade over the 15 AC medium armors, because it gives you higher AC, even though it won't let you use your dexterity. Reduces all incoming damage by 2, which is of course awesome. Prevents critical hits, just like the adamantine scale, and also inflicts 3 turns of reeling when an enemy hits you, which reduces their subsequent attacks by 3. So it's very rare that an enemy will hit you twice in a row when you're wearing this armor, because it gives you good AC and reduces enemy hit chance if they do happen to hit you. Negates critical hits, meaning that you, again, just like with the adamantine scale, don't have to worry about getting critically hit and taken out. And reducing all incoming damage by 2 is not only awesome for heavy armor users and stacks very well with the heavy armor master feat for 5 damage reduction, which is a ton of damage reduction, but also just gives you a ton of additional survivability, multiplies extremely well with temporary hit points or sources of resistance like Blade Ward to reduce incoming damage vastly, so it's just a very powerful effect. The adamantine splint is going to be one of the best tanking pieces of gear for the end of Act 1 and all of Act 2, and stays relevant throughout the entire game. If you just want the peace of mind of knowing that you can't get critically hit, the adamantine splint will do that for sure. The Dwarven Splint Mail is available in Act 2, and you can buy multiple sets of this. When you long rest, apparently, the merchant just makes a new set of the Dwarven Mail, so you can have several sets of Dwarven Splint Mail running around. It gives you 19 AC, so it's a pretty solid armor class upgrade over previous available armor classes, and gives you +2 to your constitution. This is really good for any caster character that can equip heavy armor, so cleric, or especially for bards, wizards, sorcerers, etc., with a 1-level dip into cleric to get heavy armor proficiency. The Dwarven Splint Mail makes you better at passing your con saves, gives you excellent armor class without having to invest tons into dexterity or a valuable medium armor set that another character might need more, and increases your relatively low hit points if you're a caster character with the additional constitution. The 12 additional hit points at the end of the game might be like a 6th or 7th of your total hit points, which increases your survivability significantly. Bonuses to hit points typically aren't that amazing in D&D, but when you get them as part of something that you already want, boosting your armor class and ability to pass con saves dramatically, then it's really good. So the Dwarven Splint Mail is just a powerful option for any caster character that has heavy armor proficiency. The Reaper's Embrace gives you 19 AC, as well as 2 damage reduction, and when you activate its active ability, it prevents you from being moved against your will, which is pretty good for a tank, because there are some enemies who will reposition your characters, and tanks want to stand exactly where they want to stand, also will often be like next to pits and so on, so the Reaper's Embrace can make you not have to worry about that. It also gives you an AoE ability that gives you advantage on attacks against enemies, so for a more aggressively minded tank, the Reaper's Embrace gives you most of the tankiness of the adamantine splint. It's not quite as good at defending you, but the higher AC is almost makes up for the critical hit immunity, but also gives you the ability to gain advantage on attacks and lets you prevent yourself from being moved around. So for a more offensive version of the adamantine splint, the Reaper's Embrace is pretty good. The Armor of Persistence is available in Act 3 and is the single best piece of defensive equipment in the entire game. It gives you 20 AC, reduces all incoming damage by 2, and you gain Resistance and Blade Ward as the cantrips, so you take half damage from all physical damage, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, and get, on average, +2.5, a 1d4 bonus to all of your saving throws, similar to the Armor of Agility, which does this effect by making you have super high AC. The Armor of Persistence gives you very high AC as well, and makes you effectively immune to dying from physical damage, because it halves all incoming physical damage, so you just will never be at threat from physical damage, and then in addition to that, gives you a huge bonus to your saving throws, so you're never at threat from spells when you're wearing the Armor of Persistence. This is just best in slot for any endgame tank, or any character that just wants to stay alive and has heavy armor proficiency, and is going to be the best armor in the game at keeping you alive. Finally, the Helldusk armor, I'm counting as an Act 3 armor, although there is an exploit where you can get it in Act 1, and then obviously it's game-breakingly powerful if you get it 2 acts and like 8 levels before you're supposed to have access to this armor. But even in Act 3, it's still an incredible armor set. It gives you 21 armor class, so the highest base armor class in the game, and just like the Elven Chain, you count as proficient when wearing it, so any character can use the Helldusk armor. The one downside is that barbarians can't rage while using it, because it still counts as heavy armor, even though it doesn't count as wearing armor. So it does cut off barbarian rage. But any character can use the Helldusk armor, so for characters with light armor proficiency only, or no armor proficiency only, the Helldusk armor is a huge boost to their armor class, probably up to 6 or 7 increase to their armor class. For monks, you still get fast movement and so on. While you don't get monks unarmored defense, and you can't use mage armor with this, you still get monks fast movement when you're wearing the Helldusk armor, so it's incredible for a monk who often struggle with their armor class. And just having 21 AC on any character base is going to be awesome. It also gives you 3 flat damage reduction, which is a huge amount of damage reduction, so it reduces incoming damage dramatically, even if you do get hit, and has a bunch of other smaller abilities. You get resistance to fire damage, and you can't be burned, which is nice. Fire damage resistance is a relevant resistance. You get the ability to cast the fly spell as the spell, which of course increases your mobility. And you set enemy casters on fire when you succeed a saving throw. That's a less useful ability, but overall, the defensive package that this gives to literally any character is going to make that character suddenly a defensive powerhouse. So the availability of the Helldusk armor just increases the power of your party dramatically, even if you get it as intended in Act 3. And of course, if you do the exploit and pick it up in Act 1, then it makes that character ludicrously overpowered for the entire game. So, to sum up, the Adamantine Splint is best in slot for heavy armor tanks in Act 1 and Act 2. The Dwarven Splint is best in slot for heavy armor casters, starting in Act 2. The Reaper's Embrace is a more offensive version of the Adamantine Splint, so good for paladins and similar characters who want a more aggressive option, especially if you don't have a good use for your bonus action normally. The Armor of Persistence is the best-in-slot tank item for Act 3, and the Helldusk armor is just the best-in-slot armor for literally any character who doesn't have another specific armor that they need. The only downside of the Helldusk armor is it doesn't give you an initiative bonus, but almost any party will make use of this, so pretty much any character can put it on and become stronger than they were before. In A tier, the Armor of Devotion is not an armor that you actually wear, but because the actual abilities of this armor are relatively weak, it's the same as non-magical plate armor, but it lets you recharge your Channel Oath spell as a paladin, or your Channel Oath charge as a paladin once per long rest. So a paladin will swap this in, activate the ability to get their Channel Oath back, and then swap it back out, which is a powerful effect for a paladin, of course, although, in my opinion, not worth the annoyance and the micro and the carry weight of carrying it around, but for a perfectly optimized paladin, this will be a solid option. The Rippling Force Mail only gives you 17 AC, but gives you damage reduction, because it gives you Force Absorption, which gives you, or Force Conduit, gives you 2 damage reduction to all physical damage, slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning, every time you take slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning damage. This stacks up to 7 times, which means that you can reduce incoming damage dramatically. And so the Rippling Force Mail is both part of some broken builds that just walk next to enemies and do damage based on the Force Conduit exploding, because when you stack it up to 5 and take a hit, it deals some AoE damage, which you can then layer with Rider effects and Call the Weak to just do passive damage to every enemy around you, but also is just a solid option for, say, an Abjuration Wizard that has heavy armor proficiency. This can just add more stacks of damage reduction and more retaliation damage to that character, and does a good cosplay of the Adamantine Splint if you didn't get the Adamantine Splint. either because you didn't do that story event or because you chose the two of the other adamantine items, then the Rippling Force Mail does an excellent impersonation of that. So even if you're not doing the like sort of game-breaking builds with the Rippling Force Mail, which do require some very specific setup and bug abuse, so I don't count them as like part of this item's power level particularly, it is still just a solid armor piece that reduces incoming damage dramatically. Finally, the emblazoned plate of the Marshal, similar to its medium armor counterpart, the flame enameled armor, is just a very solid piece of armor. It gives you 19 armor class and reduces all incoming damage by 2, so it's identical to the Reaper's Embrace from a defensive standpoint, and gives you a gives you resistance to fire damage and a +2 on your saving throws, so it's a great defensive option, making you very, very hard to kill with physical damage because of the AC and damage reduction, and making you even harder to kill with spell damage because of saving throws, and it lets you cast Fire Shield, so you effectively get damage resistance to fire and cold damage, both very relevant damage types to be resistant to in Act 3. This is just a very solid piece of armor, good collection of stats that all work well together. The only thing holding it back is just that for a character that wants this, they're just almost always going to be better off in the Armor of Persistence because they're both tanking armor pieces and the Armor of Persistence is just better. But for specific encounters where you're taking a lot of fire or cold damage, the Emblazoned Plate of the Marshal could be a worthy swap-in for the Armor of Persistence, or if you can't afford to buy the Armor of Persistence, this is a great option as well. And it's just a really nice armor set with a wide variety of good abilities that any character can make use of. Finally, from lower tiers, I am going to make one change based on community feedback to the heavy armor tier, and that is I'm going to bump the +1 chainmail up from C tier to B tier. The reason for this is that the +1 chainmail gives you 17 AC, so it's tied with the Githyanki half plate for a 14 dexterity character. So I was saying that it's only useful if you have lower than 14 dexterity, so I put it in C tier. But of course, this is available from merchants starting at level 4. Level 4 is also when you get access to Heavy Armor Master. So this is going to be the first set of decent heavy armor that a Heavy Armor Master character has access to, and that's a pretty powerful feat and a decent strategy to use. Will decrease incoming damage significantly. So the +1 chainmail, you can take the feat at level 4, buy this item at level 4, and get your strategy online much earlier. It is a little sad that all 3 chainmails aren't in the same tier anymore, but the +1 chainmail when you get it early for that specific character is pretty good, so I think worthy of bumping up a tier. Alright, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed that look at every single piece of armor in Baldur's Gate 3, strengths and weaknesses of all of them and which characters they were good for, and hopefully this helps you plan your parties to make optimal use of the armor sets available. If you're interested in more detail about any of these armor sets, I go into quite a bit more detail in the individual tier lists for each category, and I also talk about all of the armors in the lower tiers, so definitely check those out if you have a question about one of the armors in the lower tiers and why it ended up in that spot. If you think there's something that I got wrong, or an interaction that I missed, or something that I should move around, do not hesitate to let me know. As you saw here, I'm always open to moving things around based on community feedback, and of course I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me. As always, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like button and leave a comment. It does help me out with the algorithm, so I do appreciate you taking the time to do so, and to keep this kind of deep dive on Baldur's Gate content alive. And if you have enjoyed the videos, of course you can feel free to subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.